The British government's advice for a nuclear war was to take the doors off their hinges, lean them against a wall, and pile books on top. That was the plan. At least, it was the plan they published. Under a Wiltshire quarry, there was another. 35 acres of tunnel, 60 miles of road, and a studio built to tell you it was over. 4,000 people were meant to live down there. Not one of them would have been you. 10 of these across Europe. Number 1 is that quarry, codename Burlington, secret until 2004. Number 10. Zeltini R12, Aluksne, Latvia. If you had asked anyone farming near Aluksne in 1965 what lay behind the wire, they would have told you it was an army training ground. They had no idea. Behind 300 hectares of barbed wire and an electrified fence stood 4 launch pads for R-12 ballistic missiles, known in the West as the Sandal. Each carried a 1 megaton thermonuclear warhead with a range of 2,200 kilometers. From northern Latvia, that reaches Rome. The base opened in 1961, one of only 3 of its kind in Latvia. There were bunkers for the warheads, control bunkers, hangars, and a closed town for the men who serviced them. Inside the technical buildings, somebody painted murals of a red flag, a rocket, and a soldier with a machine gun, for an audience that was never allowed to leave. It was built to start the end of the world. But in December 1987, Regan and Gorbachev signed the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, and by the end of the decade, Zeltini was finished. The missiles went east. The soldiers followed. What is left is open. No fence and no gate remain, and a sign on the main road points you in. Concrete lanes run through the pines, past T-shaped frames that once carried miles of pipework, and warning notices in Russian are still painted inside the bunkers themselves. And on top of one launch pad where the gantry used to stand, there is a granite head of Lenin, 3 meters tall. It was hauled out of the town square at Aluksne when Latvia took its independence back and dumped here rather than smashed. Everything else on this list was built to survive the missiles. This is where the missiles lived. Number 9. Boden Fortress, Norrbotten, Sweden. 5 hills stand around a small town near the Arctic Circle, and all 5 of them are hollow. The Swedish Parliament voted for it in 1900, and work began the following year. 5 forts were blasted into 5 mountains, linked by 8 secondary artillery positions and 40 infantry bunkers, ringing the town across 25 kilometers. It was built against Russia, in an age when Finland was still Russian. Conditions were brutal. One conscript who did his service here in the 1920s went home, had 5 wolf fur coats made at his own expense, and sent one to each fort so that the sentries would not freeze. One of them is still at Rodberget. By 1945, the whole thing should have been an antique. But Sweden looked at its neighbours, decided that neutrality needed teeth, and kept it. Södra Aberget was modernised in the 1960s and reinforced again in the 1970s, specifically to survive a nuclear attack. In 1976, they fitted the hilltops with 12-centimetre guns taken out of scrapped Navy destroyers. It was also the most spied-on place in Sweden. Fritiof Enbom, a railway worker turned local newspaper editor, was arrested in February 1952 and confessed to meeting Soviet handlers around 25 times over 8 years. One of the things he sold them was the armament of a Boden fort. He got hard labour for life. The last fort went out of service at the end of 1998. Rodberget is a museum now. The other 4 are locked, moated and rusting in the trees, and the fences around them are old enough to have holes. A Victorian idea dragged into the atomic age and told to hold. Number 8. Hack Green, Cheshire, England. A grey concrete hulk sits in a wet Cheshire field, half sunk into the ground, next door to a maggot farm. Its first job was to lie. In the Second World War, Hack Green was a starfish decoy, fires lit at night to pull German bombers away from the railway junction at Crewe. Then it became a radar station for the Royal Air Force, call sign Mersey Radar. And in September 1966, it closed and was left to rot. It should have stayed rotten. But in 1976, the Home Office bought it, and in 1980, the conversion began. It took 5 years and £22 million, and what emerged in 1984 was regional government headquarters, 10.2. Walls of reinforced concrete, 2 meters thick, rated to survive a 1 megaton detonation 2.5 kilometers away. 400 people would have worked here. At the centre sat a regional commissioner, an unelected appointee, handed emergency powers over Cheshire, Merseyside and Manchester, with responsibility for rationing, for law and order and for the dead. They practised. Home Office exercises in the 1980s tested the communications and the business of actually living down there, and the reports back are worth reading. Inadequate laundry facilities, not enough dormitory space, and lavatory doors whose locks did not work. £22 million, and they could not get the toilets to shut. It has been a museum since 1998, and it holds the largest collection of decommissioned nuclear weapons in Britain, including a Polaris warhead and a Trident re-entry vehicle. Outside the blast door, there is still a sign telling unauthorized persons to keep away, with a smaller sign underneath explaining that this no longer applies. Number 7. The Sonnenberg Tunnel, Lucerne, Switzerland. 55,000 vehicles a day drive through the largest civilian nuclear shelter ever built, and almost none of the drivers know it. In 1963, Switzerland passed a law requiring a shelter place for every person in the country, not for the government, for everyone. So when Lucerne built a new motorway tunnel under the Sonnenberg Hill, the two projects were made into one. Construction ran from 1971 to 1976. 2 road tubes, each 1.5 kilometres long, each holding 10,000 people once the traffic stopped. 4 blast doors, 1.5 metres thick, 350 tons apiece. Between the tubes, a 7-storey cavern with a command post, a hospital, a radio studio and prison cells. In storage, 450 tons of flat-packed bunk beds. 20,000 people, a third of the city, and on paper, the most generous piece of civil defence in Europe. So what happened when they finally tried it? In 1987, they closed both tunnels for 5 days and ran the only full-scale test the shelter ever had, an exercise called Operation Ant. Closing the 4 blast doors took 24 hours. The trolleys carrying the beds jammed in the corridors. There were no radios, so staff ran up and down shouting at each other. By the end of the week, they had managed about a quarter of the setup, and 1 door would not seal. The capacity was quietly revised down, and in 2006, the shelter was cut to 2,000 places. This is the only place where the plan was to save everybody, which is why it is the only one anybody bothered to test. If you are enjoying these, subscribe, because there is a version of this story under every country in Europe. The next 4 get stranger, and number 1 is the biggest of them. The tunnel is still a motorway, the cavern is still down there. 450 tons of bunk beds folded flat, and nobody ever slept in one. Number 6. Kelvedon Hatch, Essex, England. By 1952, Britain had tested its own atomic bomb, and the Air Ministry was quietly buying farmland in Essex. 25 miles from London, there is a bungalow in a wood. Pebble dash, net curtains, a small brick porch. Behind the brickwork, it is lined with steel, and it is not a house at all. It is a door. The bunker beneath it was actually built across 1952 and 1953, on land requisitioned from a farmer called Parish. It runs 3 stories down, 125 feet below the fields, wrapped in 10 feet of reinforced concrete inside a Faraday cage, and you reach it along a tunnel 120 yards long. It began life as a radar control centre. But the radar became obsolete, and the Home Office kept the whole and simply changed the job. It became a regional seat of government, and then the regional government headquarters for London. 600 people, 3 months, a cabinet minister with the power to govern the capital, or what was left of it, and a studio for the British Broadcasting Corporation, the BBC, to tell the survivors that a government still existed. There were spare bunk beds along the entrance tunnel, because 600 people did not quite fit. It was decommissioned in 1992, stripped and sold. The buyers were the Parish family, who had lost the farmland to it 40 years earlier. They bought the bunker back along with the fields, refitted it, and opened it to the public. Which is how the most secret building in Essex came to be signposted from the main road in brown tourist lettering as the secret nuclear bunker. Number 5. Scotland's secret bunker, Troywood, Fife. 3 miles north of Anstruther, a private road runs between barbed wire fences to a farmhouse with red pantiles, built to look like every other farmhouse in the East Noik of Fife. The tiles are camouflage, so is the stone. Work began in 1951. The contractors signed the Official Secrets Act, and the lorries bringing materials had to stop at the end of the drive. What they built was a radar station on 2 levels, 100 feet down, encased in 15 feet of reinforced concrete and reached by a tunnel 450 feet long. The radar job lasted a decade. But around 1970, the whole place was gutted and rebuilt as the seat of government for Scotland in a nuclear war. 300 people, dormitories for the juniors, private rooms for the ministers, 2 cinemas, a broadcasting studio and a chapel. Britain's regional bunkers should have been an open secret by then. In February 1963, 4 activists calling themselves the Spies for Peace acted on a tip-off, drove to Warren Row in Berkshire and found regional seat of government number 6. They went back, photographed the documents and posted 3,000 copies of a pamphlet called Danger, Official Secret to the Press and to Politicians. It listed the other bunkers. It listed the people who would be inside them with their telephone numbers. The government issued a D notice to keep it out of the papers. It was far too late. Marchers on the Aldermaston route walked off and picketed the site. The spies were never caught. The list did not include Troywood. Nobody had found it. It was decommissioned in 1993 and opened as a museum the year after. In 2004, a man drove a digger through the perimeter, sealed himself inside, and held off armed police for 3 days. Number 4. Harnekop, Brandenburg, Germany. 50 kilometers east of Berlin, in a forest between Verneuchen and Bad Freienwalde, there was a small building the locals understood to be a weather station. There were no signs to it. It was not on any map. The weather station was a roof. Underneath it, between 1971 and 1976, East Germany built the most important thing it owned. Object 16102 runs 3 floors down, 30 meters into sand and gravel. The outer walls are reinforced concrete up to 3.2 meters thick. The pressure doors weigh 2.5 tons each. The whole box sits on shock absorbers, so it can move when the ground does. 95 steps take you to the bottom. From here, the Minister for National Defence would have commanded the National People's Army and the border troops with 400 to 500 people around him and supplies for 30 days. It was the last place in the country its leadership expected to die in. It never saw a war. But in October 1990, something happened down there that no engineer had designed for. The army that built it stood down, and its officers put on the uniform of the enemy they had spent 30 years planning to fight. For 3 years afterwards, the German Federal Army used Harnekop as a communications centre. It is a listed monument now, 10 to 12 degrees all year round, and you can book a tour. Every bunker on this list rests on one assumption, which is that there will be time to reach it. The clock was already running. None of the people who built these places could hear it yet. The one waiting at number 1 is the largest of them all, and it is the one that ran out of time first. Number 3, Regan Vest, Rold Skov, Denmark. At the edge of Denmark's largest forest, there is a yellow brick villa with a neat garden. The engineer responsible for the machinery lived in it with his family. The house was the front door to the most secret building in the country. Work began in 1963, a few months after the Cuban Missile Crisis, at the insistence of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It took 5 years and went 60 meters down into a limestone hill. 232 rooms, around 350 people, 30 days. The name abbreviates the Danish for Government Relocation Facility in West Denmark. The monarch had to be there. Danish law requires the sovereign to sign legislation, so a government without its regent is not a government. There is a room down there for the Queen. It is the same as all the others, except that she had her own bathroom. The rest was furnished the way Denmark furnishes things. Arne Jacobsen chairs. Good lamps. It is the only Doomsday bunker in Europe that a design museum would recognise. It stayed on standby into the 21st century. But the state never admitted it existed until 2012, by which point the war it was built for had been over for 20 years, and the last engineer had moved his family out of the villa. It opened as a museum in February 2023, everything still in place. The opening was delayed by the pandemic, and by 6 species of bat that had moved in and could not legally be evicted. Every state on this list published its advice to the public, and then built something else for itself. Denmark simply built the most civilized version of the something else. 60 meters down, and the tickets now sell out within days. Number 2, Marienthal, Ahrweiler, Germany. Above the Ahr Valley, between Ahrweiler and Durnau, vineyards climb steep slate slopes and produce very good red wine. Under the vines run 2 railway tunnels, dug for a freight line that was never finished. They have a history before the bomb. From 1935, the Nazi state ran Germany's largest mushroom farm inside them. In 1944, they became a sub-camp of Buchenwald, and the prisoners sent there assembled mobile launch pads for V-2 rockets. Then, Bonn became a capital, and Bonn was 25 kilometers away. Digging began in 1960 and finished in 1972. 17.3 kilometers of tunnel, 936 bedrooms and 897 offices for 3,000 people for 30 days. Its official title was the alternative seat of the constitutional organs of the Federation in a state of crisis or defence. Its cover name was Office Marienthal. It is the most expensive building the Federal Republic has ever put up. There was a hairdressing salon. There was a bed for the Chancellor. It was kept in working order for 30 years, and Ludwig Erhard and Helmut Schmidt both went down to see the rooms they would have governed from. But in 1997, the federal government gave the place up, and between 2001 and 2006, almost the entire complex was gutted and sealed, partly to protect the groundwater, and mostly because nobody could justify the bill. 203 meters survive as a museum, opened in 2008. That is a little over 1%. Everything else is bare concrete behind welded doors under a vineyard. The reason even that fragment exists is that demolishing the lot would have cost 30 million euros, and the museum was cheaper. The most expensive building in West Germany, and you can walk 1/100th of it. Number 1. Burlington, Corsham, Wiltshire, England. Corsham is a market town of about 13,000 people. Honey-coloured, pretty, entirely unremarkable. Beneath it are the Bath stone quarries that built it, worked since the Romans. In 1940, the Ministry of Aircraft Production took over Spring Quarry and turned part of it into an underground aircraft factory. After the war, it went to storage. In the late 1950s, with London judged unsurvivable, the government came back for it. Construction ran from 1959 to 1961. What they made down there is not a bunker. It is a city. 35 acres, a kilometre long and 200 metres across, 30 metres below the fields. 60 miles of road, with street names driven in electric buggies. Over 100,000 light bulbs. 2 canteens, 4 residential areas, a bakery, a laundry, and a hospital with an operating theatre. An underground lake for drinking water. 12 fuel tanks to run the generators for 3 months. A constant 20 degrees, day and night, forever. It held Britain's second largest telephone exchange. Messages were fired between departments through pneumatic tubes. There was a studio for the BBC, staffed by 11 people who would have broken into normal programming to tell the country what had just happened to it. None of the 11 knew they had been chosen. 4,000 people were to be brought here by a rail spur off the main line from London, under the code word Orange Aid. It had 4 names before that one: Subterfuge, Stockwell, Turnstile and Burlington. And it was obsolete before it was finished. The whole plan assumed hours of warning and a train out of Paddington. By the 1980s, the warning time was 4 minutes. The bunker needed hours. Nobody would have reached the platform. They kept it anyway. The telephone directories down there were still being updated in the late 1980s, and by the end, the whole 35 acres was run by a maintenance crew of 4 men. There is a persistent story of a pub down there, the Rose and Crown, modelled on the Red Lion in Whitehall. It has never been confirmed, and I suspect it is exactly the sort of thing civil servants told one another, so that the whole enterprise seemed survivable. Burlington was declassified in December 2004, by which point the lake had been drained and the fuel tanks emptied. It was never used. The boxes of government-issue ashtrays, lavatory brushes and civil service tea sets were still sealed. Parts have since been sold, and one is now a wine store holding some of the most expensive wine on earth. 4,000 places, 4 minutes of warning, and the only thing down there now is somebody's claret. There are places on this list that were built to start the war. There are places that were built to survive it. And there is exactly one under a hill in Lucerne that was built to save everybody, which is precisely why it is the only one anybody ever tested properly, and the only one we know for certain would not have worked. 10 of them today. There are more. Every state in Europe drew up the same 2 plans and then filed them in very different drawers. One was printed on cheap paper, priced at 50 pence and sold in the shops. The other was blasted into rock and denied for 50 years. So the interesting question was never really whether the bunkers would have held. Most of the men who built them privately doubted that they would, and the ones who tested them found out. The question that is left, and the one that still sits awkwardly under every guided tour and every gift shop, is who was on the list? Who got the quarry, the exchange, the studio and the lake? And who was handed a door, a pile of books, and told to get on with it? Subscribe, and we will find the next 10 together. Thank you.